LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, I'm Daryl Jackson. A teenage girl's been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after two teachers and a pupil were stabbed at a school in Carmarthenshire. The incident happened at a Man Valley school earlier today. Their injuries aren't life-threatening. The leader of the local county council is Darren Price.
Our priority now is to do all that we can over the coming days and weeks to support the pupils and staff in the aftermath. Today's events have come as a grave shock to the school community, to Ammanford, Carmarthenshire and further afield.
A 16-year-old's been arrested in France after saying he wanted to die a martyr at the Olympics. Police say an investigation's underway into whether he had genuine intentions to commit a terrorist act. Rishi Sunak says his plans to increase defence spending are fully funded. Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced the rate would go up to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. A man's been charged with kidnapping a 9-year-old girl in central London. She went missing on Monday afternoon in Knightsbridge and was found later with a suspect. And paramedics say 4 people are injured after 2 military horses ran loose in central London. The animals are understood to have been spooked by builders moving rubble. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 4 points at 80.40. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.16.
LBC Weather.
With Ripple Energy. Climate action you can be proud of.
Largely dry tonight with showers in northeast Scotland and a low of 1 degree. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. Welcome to Cross Question. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. With me on tonight's panel is John Nicolson, who is SNP for... Now, I'm being told by Gordon that I've mispronounced this. Is it Ochil?
Ochil.
Right, OK. Well, I knew I'd do something wrong. And South Perthshire. He's the SNP culture spokesperson in Westminster, former broadcaster. Also with us, Scarlett Maguire, director of the polling company JL Partners, Dom Joly, comedian and broadcaster, and Andrew Bowie, who's Conservative Energy Security Minister and MP for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine. They're here to answer your questions. The number to call 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp a question on that number. You can text 84850, and of course you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And you can watch us on Global Player. All these things that we give you, we're just too good to our audience, I think. So lots of different subjects to talk about tonight. I imagine we'll probably want to talk about maybe Rishi Sunak's visit to Poland and Germany, defence spending, what's going on in Ukraine, the fact that Joe Biden has now okayed this massive deal to...
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to Rod in Birmingham. Hi, Rod.
Good evening. I'd just like to ask, do your panel think that we could use the various types of soft power we have around the world in support of Ukraine instead of increasing defence spending?
What do you mean? What define what you mean by using our soft power?
You'd like an example that I'm thinking of, and I'm not a diplomat, but we're talking about a big free trade deal, for instance, with India, and India is supporting Russia by, I think, buying their oil. So could we put pressure on India and say, if you want to complete this deal with us that you want, then you have to help us in support of Ukraine, even though it's against Russia? Because India is trying to look our way and India way.
It's not a case of either or, is it, former diplomat Dom Joly?
I'm really pleased he came to me on this. So let me know. I was a former diplomat, quite genuinely. People are quite astonished before I donned my squirrel suit for Trigger Happy TV. But my diplomatic history consisted of me being in Prague as Czechoslovakia broke up, basically taking a lot of meetings and saying, I'll refer that back to Brussels, and then hoping never asked me again. I don't know. Having said that, I have been to Ukraine 3 times, and very recently, last year, I went on quite a long trip for Save the Children. I went to Odessa, Mykolaiv, and the one thing I'm pretty clear is that Putin is not going to be stopped by soft power. You know, what are we going to do, like force-feed the world service into the Kremlin or something? I don't know. I really don't. I think at the moment we have to take a stand there. I think it's looking... I mean, if Trump comes in, I really, really fear for Ukraine. So, and with all these different elections coming and people not wishing to commit, I don't think soft power is the answer, certainly. Not a very diplomatic answer, but...
I always think in these situations, you have to think, what would Zelensky want? And, I mean, I don't think
some jazz.
I think he'd like a few aircraft, wouldn't he, John?
Well, yes, indeed, and I agree with Dom. I think soft power isn't the answer at the moment. And it's interesting that you mentioned Czechoslovakia and Prague in particular. I actually drove to Prague just before the wall came down, drove from Scotland to Prague across the Iron Curtain. I managed to get in, yeah. I was with my friend Krishnan, the dancer from Strictly, who does a bit of Channel 4 News as well.
This sounds like a massive documentary series needing to be made.
It was a very interesting...
You must have been a schoolboy at the time.
It was a very... we were both just
out of course.
We were both just out of school.
I had the only convertible in Prague straight after the Velvet Revolution.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I drove a wee MG midget across.
You know what? Maybe
It's not a competition, guys.
And just crossing the border with a wee MG, it was really interesting. Anyway, what I was going to say, and obviously importantly, is that people from Central and Eastern Europe really understand the threat that Russia
100%,
poses. Yeah. That's why the Estonians and the other Baltic states have been warning us for a long time to take Putin more seriously, and our whole reaction to the invasion of Crimea really was shockingly underplayed, and we have consistently underestimated Putin. I'm very glad that we're giving the support we're giving now that the Americans have passed the deal that they have. I think it was very disturbing the way in which Republicans have been radicalized to excuse Putin's behavior. You know, the Tucker Carlson interview, and I noticed that the Senate Republican leader expressly suggested that Tucker Carlson had radicalized many of his own supporters. And I'm glad that the defence spending has now been passed, and I notice that the arms are already on their way to Ukraine. We cannot allow Ukraine to lose this, because if we do allow Ukraine to lose this, Western democracy itself is threatened, and we have to give them full-hearted support and to help them win this war.
Has this whole Ukrainian issue made you think that the SNP's defence policy needs to be reviewed? Because you're very against nuclear weapons, and I mean, if Ukraine had maintained its nuclear arsenal and hadn't agreed to give them away in the early 1990s, there's no way that Putin would have invaded now.
Well, they would need to be prepared to use them, and we'll never know how that would have played out. I'm strongly in favour of NATO. And I'm not in favour of nuclear weapons. One of the reasons that I support Scottish independence and support a strong Scottish defence force within NATO is I would like to see us better defended with conventional weapons. We are enormously under-defended in the North Sea. The lack of naval vessels available to patrol our waters is, I think, a disgrace. And you compare the way that Scotland is defended with the way that Denmark, a comparable country also in NATO with a strong conventional forces, is defended. They're infinitely better defended than our waters are. So I think we've got very hung up on this idea of having nuclear weapons that we would never use, that we can't even use on our own. And I would remove those nuclear weapons I would remove those weapons from our territory, and I would spend the money on conventional weaponry and conventional vessels, which I think Scotland desperately needs.
Scarlett Maguire, let's add a bit of polling into this. You might be relieved to hear, I don't know. But where are the British public on this now? Because I think when Russia invaded, people supported the government stance on this. But, I mean, I detect, and this is just anecdotal from phone calls I get into the programme, I mean, good example tonight, a couple, and you think, well, what planet are they on? Where are the public now on Ukraine?
I think it's a great question, and we've talked a bit about America, and whilst it's not a sort of domestic, sort of very contested issue like it is in America, especially amongst the Republican base, I think what you are seeing is we do the polling for the Munich Security Conference every year, so that involves all the G7 countries as well as the BRICS countries.
That's a good contract to have.
It's a very good contract. and I'll talk about the BRICS countries are quite separate and actually have always been softer on Russia, and they see the world through quite a different lens on this issue issue and some other issues relating to defence. But if we take the G7 countries, when the war broke out 2 years ago, there was an immediate and total rallying, basically, around Ukraine and understanding that people were prepared to sacrifice certain things, even domestically, for the sake of Ukraine and fighting Russia. That has changed over 2 years. I do not think that's actually to the public's detriment. I just think things move on. It's in the news less. People have more. People have pressing issues on their day-to-day finances. They're not thinking about these threats. In some ways, they think that's politicians' jobs to think of these threats. I think that's true, and I think that means that it's also then politicians' jobs to bring the public with them and to make the case. And I think that's something we've not been seeing very much of over the last year, as it's been less and less in the headlines and talked about less and less. Partly that's because there is difficulty with America. So there's been, I think, a certain sort of reluctance to tackle this from some of America's foremost politicians. But it applies here, and I think that's why it's important to have very sort of, it's not even about an open dialogue, but it's about trying to say, we are sending this money, it's important for this reason, and this is why we think you should do this, and, potentially not argue for soft power, but that's why we're sending sort of real things instead.
But when you hear sums like an extra £75 billion, and of course Labour is slightly querying that amount now, but naturally people think, well, we could, if we spent that on the health service or education, that would solve all of our problems in this country.
And this is something I think you will start hearing more and more. Certainly, as you say, and you're hearing it more anecdotally from callers. We are also starting to hear it more from focus groups. It's starting to come up organically. It never used to before. People are saying, but why are we sending, if we don't have, I thought we don't have money here, so why are we sending it to Ukraine? And again, that's why I think that it is on politicians to make the case.
Yeah. I'm going to come to Andrew in a second. Don, you quickly.
I mean, if you listen to any Russians before or during the invasion, they all said this. They said, we know we've got all the time in the world. The West have very short attention spans. They know it's a waiting game. They know that we'll get bored, we'll get fatigued, and we'll give up.
But we haven't, though.
We haven't at the moment.
No,
but I mean, this is they're thinking very long term.
That was what I meant to say, was that support across the G7 for military aid, for financial aid, and even for taking Ukrainian refugees is quite sharply down on this time last year. And even though it's still in sort of net positive territory, it's declining.
OK. Let's remind ourselves of the question, could we use soft power to support Ukraine better instead of yet more defence spending? Andrew Bowie.
Well, look, very interesting question, actually. And I'm thinking back to two of the most rewarding jobs I've had since I've had the privilege of holding ministerial briefs has been when I was Exports Minister, being responsible for our trade policy with Ukraine. And now that I am Energy Minister, the Energy Security Brief. So looking at what we can do to support Ukraine rebuild and keep the lights on, protect the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, which of course is under Russian occupation, and ensure that when I was Exports Minister, we have a trade policy that encourages investment and allows the Ukrainian economy to rebound as quickly as possible once they have won. But the key point there is once they have won. And we cannot get to that stage until we defeat Vladimir Putin in his aims of annexing part of that country, or indeed all of that country, as his original aim was. And that means continuing to commit to support the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian government in their fight, and indeed increasing our own defence capability so that we can aid in other ways Ukraine and our allies when they're facing off against Vladimir Putin. Because be under no illusion here, the reason that Estonia and Lithuania, the Baltic states, the Scandinavian states, the reason that Finland and Sweden took the remarkable step, skewing 200 years of domestic policy to join NATO, was because they see Putin, if he is successful in Ukraine, of turning his eyes towards them, and we cannot allow that to happen. So that's why I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister made the announcement he did yesterday. Very pleased that we are continuing to send aid to Ukraine. Very pleased the United States has finally gotten on and passed their act so they can get the weapons that Ukraine need. Yes, soft power does have a role to play. We need to have a good trading relationship. We need to rebuild the Ukrainian energy market, for example. But we can't do that until Vladimir Putin and that needs military spending.
The example that Rod used there about India is an interesting one because, and I think the Indian government's position has slightly changed over the last couple of years, but they were certainly not criticising Putin at the beginning. I mean, is that where we should be using our soft power to say to countries like India, come on, you wouldn't like it if Pakistan invaded you, so why do you think Ukraine should put up with it from Russia? We can't do a trade deal with a country that is behaving like this.
Well, I mean, it was the Foreign Secretary, as is right now, and indeed all the way back to when the invasion first occurred, when it was Liz Truss, have been assiduous in their diplomatic efforts around the world to have have sanctions, global sanctions against Russia, to encourage countries who are trading with Russia to cease doing that, so we can harm them economically. All of that alongside and in concert with the support that we're giving to the Ukrainian government in their fight on the ground against Putin. Of course, we don't want countries doing business with Russia right now, keeping that economy afloat, allowing them to continue their action in Ukraine. We've put a lot of effort to try and deter our allies and our friends from doing that. But the focus right now, especially, has to be defeating Russia on the battlefield, and that's why it's very good news that the United States of America has got its act together, and that we continue as a country to send the support that we are.
Mike has sent in a WhatsApp message to Corey, our producer. Given the disappointing result to yesterday's fun question at the end of the programme, can we have the same question again to tonight's panel, please? I'll answer on Corey's behalf. No. It's 8:15.
This is LBC.
UK.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
17 minutes past 8 on LBC. We have Conservative Minister Andrew Bowie with us, Dom Joly, comedian and broadcaster. Is that how you like to be described? Because you're quite a lot of things you do, aren't there?
Jack of all trades. Travel writer's the thing I love most.
Travel writer, right. I'm going to put travel writer on there. John Nicolson, SNP MP for Ochil? Ochil.
You'll get it by the end.
It'd be too late then. And South Perthshire, and the party's culture spokesperson in Westminster. Scarlett Maguire is director of the polling company JL Partners. Right, a text question from Katie, who says, Angela Rayner got in first at PMQs today and made a joke about her housing situation. Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, seemed a little taken aback. Is she right to tackle it head on, or is it not a laughing matter? John?
Oliver Dowden always seems a little taken aback. That's his resting facial position, isn't it? Look, I don't know anything about Angela Rayner's house. I don't care very much about Angela Rayner's house. I think the fact that there's this howling mob pursuing her over a relatively small amount of money, even if she owes the money, and I don't know that she does, when there's been such massive corruption in so much of the spending that we saw and the contracts that were given during the lockdown by the Conservatives. I just think we should focus on the big stuff and ignore the little stuff. But I feel a bit that she's been rather let down by the party leader, hasn't she? Because he refused to back her. She had to say that she would resign if the investigation went against her. He refused to back her.
Did he?
Yes, and he's in this very odd position where he said that there's this legal advice that she's relying on, and it hasn't been released, and he's saying he hasn't read it. He's a lawyer. Isn't the first thing you would do if you were her pal say, well, listen, I'm a KC, got quite a lot of experience in this stuff. Let me glance at your lawyer's letter.
But then he's dipped his hand in the blood, hasn't he?
Well, I know why he's not doing it, of course, but were I a journalist interviewing him, I would say, so, Ciara, why haven't you read the letter? You keep saying you haven't read the letter, but why haven't you read the letter? But, I have to stress my overall position on it is it seems much ado about nothing, and it's yet another example, I think, of a mob pursuing a woman in politics in a particularly malevolent way, I think, and I just hate seeing it. And Angela Rayner's frequently a target for very unpleasant attacks in the tabloids, and it's unsavoury, and I'm not saying this is misogynistic, but a lot of her treatment overall seems to me to be enormously misogynistic.
She's actually quite popular among Tory MPs, isn't she, Andrew Bowie?
Yeah, she's great fun, isn't she?
Yeah, well, I mean,
nice.
Personal views aside, and there is an investigation ongoing, so we have to be very careful what we actually say here. It is quite possible that if she has done what she is reported to have done, then she has broken the law. So it isn't a laughing matter, and we have to, she held, some people say rightly, Conservative ministers who were accused of breaking the law to account, calling for a police investigation. It's only right and proper that she's held to the same standard that she was holding other people. So we should let the police investigation take its course. I do agree with John. It's quite remarkable that Keir Starmer is seemingly refusing to read this advice as a KC and somebody who professes to enjoy reading as a pastime. You would think he would find time to actually see exactly what that advice was. We should let the police investigation run its course, but if she has been found to have broken the law, then I think it's incumbent on her to do the right thing and to, as she would call for a Conservative minister to do if the boot were on the other foot, to stand down.
Scarlett, what do the public think about this? Do they give a toss?
On the whole, I don't think it's got massive cut through. I do think there's a sort of a wider point, which is that trust in politicians is at an all-time low, a record low since it's being measured. That's for politicians across the board. I think it's not helped by there's always seems to be predominantly Conservative MPs in the headlines recently for doing things that aren't so great. And so people don't trust politicians, don't trust their motives at all. And so I think either side, the sort of mudslinging that we've seen and the sort of pursuit of this as a story, just sort of saying she's wrong, it is a sort of race to the bottom, and it's not going to leave any politicians, I think, particularly better off in the long run, just because the public already thinks so little of all of them, all of you. But it is.
I noticed your hesitation.
Yeah. But so I think that is a factor. I think if either side is doing it for short-term political gain, there's a longer political price to pay, which is not a particularly good one.
And that's a horrible thing as well. I think this whole idea.
Nasty,
I think this idea that they're all scoundrels, they're all rogues, you can't trust any of them. That really falls into the kind of Boris Johnson, Trump.
But it's increasingly pervasive,
isn't it?
It is
what
pervasive.
They want us. They want us as the public not to believe anybody, because that way they can just spew lies all the time, and the public will eventually stop distinguishing between trusted news sources and unsafe news sources, trusted politicians and untrustworthy politicians, and that doesn't help democracy.
I agree.
Tom?
To me, our world tipped in one particular moment, and it was Trump's spokeswoman when she used that term alternative facts. I just think everything shifted at that stage. Firstly, thrilled that John's standing up for Angela Rayner, because I think you and I have both been accused of being misogynists by Nadine Dorris for an attack, which I thought was quite justified.
Well, she's accused everyone of being a misogynist who doesn't agree with her.
She's accused you of everything.
Yes. I mean, you weren't quite...
Well, I helped stop her getting into the House of Lords, so I think that made her quite.
Then you need to be put into the House of Lords for that, possibly. Do you think that's true?
What, that I stopped her getting into the House of Lords?
I think she did quite a lot of work
Howard, John.
Well, I did send the report which showed that she had misled a Commons committee to the Lords Appointments Committee, and I don't think that did her any good.
So you're just being
anyway, back to Angela Rayner.
Yeah, I think anyone. I think the problem with the public is I agree when I talk about it from my perspective as a sort of comedian commentator. It is that feeling of, well, they're all at it. They're all as bad as each other, and I hope I don't believe that. I think there are, angels there as well as bad ones. And I think if Angela Rayner has done something terribly wrong, she needs to be held to account. The problem is, it's the level of the attack. It's the balance of attack against something relatively trivial compared to the stuff that I think that some of the Tories have done and the way the papers have treated it.
We had Darren Jones, the Labour Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury, on last night.
A great impressionist, I guess.
And not. And he was sitting where John is, and there was a question, which I can't remember what the question was now. And he said, I don't know the answer to that.
Hurrah.
And I said to him, well, one of your colleagues was on a couple of weeks ago, and after the following break, because she didn't know the answer, but she sort of fluffed her way through it, she then got a text from her office to tell her what the answer was. He said, well, maybe my office will do that. And sure enough, they did. And they sent it to his phone, and he was literally reading out the answer. And then it got to a point where he said, if pushed, say this.
Oh, no.
And he read it all out. And I thought, well, good on you, actually, because I'm sure there'll be people in Labour Party HQ who thought that was a terrible thing to have done. But I think everybody listening would have thought, well, good on you.
Absolutely.
Remember, George Bush Senior did that, and he read the Autocue,
Yes.
and then he said, message, I care.
Yeah. Remember to smile.
But do you... Because there is this sort of narrative that politicians are lying, thieving scumbags as a species. But then when you say, well, what do you think of your own MP? And generally people will say, well, they did this for me, or they gave me that bit of advice, or they helped my neighbour do this. And when you reduce it down to the individual, you get a very... I mean, you must see this all the time, Scarlett.
Yeah, totally. People feel much more favourably about their individual MPs than they do about parties as a whole, or sort of politicians as a sort of general species. I don't think that's going to necessarily help individual MPs at the next election, because I think the sort of mood of public opinion against government is so strong, so I don't think that's necessarily going to help individual Conservative MPs. But yes, people, generally speaking, have positive interactions with their MPs. Even some of those MPs that then end up being in headlines for one thing or another, or triggering by-elections or whatever, people tend to be able to point to things they've done to them, and I guess that's a benefit of our particular model.
We got a follow-up question from Luke in Dagenham. Luke, what would you like to say?
I'd like to ask if we should ban insults in the House of Commons following Angela Rayner's comments about Rishi Sunak being a pint-sized loser.
But you do John Nicholson out of a job.
Yeah. His job is done.
It is an interesting point, but when I saw this...
Sorry, am I associated particularly with insults?
I think you're quite capable of dishing them out, aren't you?
I like to think not. I
admire you for them.
Well, thank you. Well, in that case, I'm very proud of them. No, I think it's fine to debate, and I think humour is sometimes quite useful in politics, but I don't think you should be, and I try and avoid being personal about people. And in social media, I rarely personalise things, and I certainly never copy people.
Quite personal about
I never copy people in. Well,
was she the exception?
She was probably a bit of an exception, but even then, at one point, what Jill would always do if she appeared before us at the Select Committee, and if you criticised her for something, she would then turn around and say, yes, but you've done that too. So she was poisonous on social media. She called your colleague James O'Brien an apologist for Islamic terrorism. She would say terrible things, and she was in charge, ironically, of the online safety bill. Yeah. And so I pointed out when cross-examining her that she seemed an inappropriate person given her own online history. So she then said, but look at your online history. And I said, produce some evidence that I'm ever offensive online, and she couldn't find anything. So I was robust with her, but I don't think I was rude to her.
Comment from Angela Rayner today about Rishi Sunak being a pint-sized loser. Well, you're not a loser, Andrew, yet, but you're sort of relatively pint-sized. Do you?
Oh my God! Do you double down?
Do you Do you find that sort of thing insulting? I mean, it's just part of parliamentary repartee.
Look, I mean, we've got a responsibility. I think the tone in political discourse in this country sadly has degraded recently. I think we can blame a lot of things for that. I think Twitter has had a massive role to play, and you do see an encroachment into the House of Commons of the language that previously you would only probably experience online. I think all politicians have a responsibility to retain civility in discourse. Arguments do get heated, and the House of Commons is set up as an adversarial chamber, and you are going to attack your opposite number. On policy, yes. Sometimes that can stray into the personally offensive. I have seen it happen. I try very hard not to. Huge disagreements with John on specifically constitutional politics, for example. But I think you need to try and steer away from being personally vitriolic or vindictive. We, as I said, have a responsibility. People look to us to be able to debate issues with passion on all sides, but steer away from personal attacks. And that is why, actually, people sometimes ask, why do you call each other the honourable member for this? Why do you always refer to the person in the third person? That was designed to try and avoid personal insults and attacks within the chamber of the House of Commons. So I think we do need to work harder to ensure that it doesn't creep still further into our debate. I don't think it's in a too bad a place. I mean, today, I thought it was quite funny, actually. I mean, I wouldn't have used it personally, but it's not something I would like to see.
And also context, historical context. I mean, people always think things were better in the old days, but you know, if you look back to if you look back to Georgian political debates, I mean, some of the language used was extraordinary.
Just look at the cartoons.
Prior to the recording and filming of what went on in the chamber, I mean, the language and the attitude and the behaviour of members of Parliament was absolutely atrocious. Some of the older MPs will tell us. So some of the misogyny that, for example, Margaret Thatcher endured when she first became Education Secretary was absolutely appalling from the opposition.
She got over it, though,
so she got over it quite quickly, yeah.
I think the problem... Yeah, I mean, the problem was that, frankly, Oliver Dowden was hanging himself. I mean, he's not a fantastically great performer, and I think she gave him a get-out clause by using a really weak insult, actually.
You know who he reminds me of? Do you remember the New Statesman, the Brick Mail?
Do you know what?
Piers Fletcher Dervish.
100%.
Do you remember?
I was thinking that just today. Even he was the dress was
before your time.
I'm afraid well before
you
my
remember
time.
Though, don't you?
That was the
remember that character.
It's the great Maurice Gran who lives in Cheltenham with me. He's a good friend, so yeah.
Right, we're going to move on from this malarkey in the next half an hour to some very, very serious subjects, and we'll, of course, have our fun question at the end, which won't involve our panellists doing impressions after last night. It's 8:31 News Headlines with Daryl Jackson.
A teenage girl has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after 2 teachers and a pupil were stabbed at a school in Carmarthenshire. Officers say the injuries are not life-threatening and a knife has been recovered from the scene at Amman Valley School. The Chief of Defence Staff has told LBC he sleeps well at night despite the growing threat from Russia and China. After the Prime Minister increased defence spending, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin says he has full confidence in the UK military and intelligence services. And witnesses have described the total mayhem after 2 military horses ran loose across central London. 4 people were injured as the animals were spooked by builders moving rubble. LBC weather largely dry tonight, showers in north-east Scotland and a low of 1 degree.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:34 on LBC. With us on the panel, Conservative MP and Minister Andrew Bowie, Dom Joly, travel writer, comedian.
That's all you have
a text question from somebody who hasn't given their name. If you send a WhatsApp message or a text message, please do give us your name. Do the violent rallies in central London on St George's Day yesterday make the strongest case yet for Scottish independence? John Nicholson.
I don't understand the connection. What's the connection?
Well, I must admit that was my first reaction when I read this question.
Do hooligans and thugs rampaging through London mean that we've got to escape from the Union? No, that's not a reason to escape from the Union. They're hooligans and thugs. They don't represent decent, honourable, ordinary English people. They're just nasty thugs, and that's all there is to it. And I'm just very sad, actually, as a Scottish person, that the St George's...
You're Scottish?
The Scottish... I am, I confess. I'll come out to you as that now. I'm just very sad that the St George's flag has been commandeered by these awful...
But it hasn't.
people.
That's the point, isn't it?
Well, they've chosen to... Well, if you ask many people from our BAME communities, for example, if they feel comfortable with the St George's flag, if they feel comfortable calling themselves English, they'll say no, because they...
Some will, you're right.
Well, I've never met anyone who said that who's BAME who embraces it.
You should listen to LBC more.
Well, I'll put that on my to-do list.
But it's interesting, because it was the British Empire, not the English Empire.
Would you accept, nonetheless, that in a general sense, most BAME people are uncomfortable with the flag because of the associations? And I'm just simply making the point that I'm sorry that they choose to despoil the English flag in the way that they do. And for these puce-faced, drunken hooligans to rampage through central London, they're meant to be great patriots. And there they are, attacking the police, attacking monuments, and I think it's utterly repulsive, and I don't understand the questioner's link with Scottish independence. There's many arguments for Scottish independence, but none of them are anything to do with a few thuggish racists.
Scarlett Maguire.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. Again, I don't actually really see the connection. I would say to John that in my experience, and certainly from what we see, it's not necessarily, I don't know about BAME communities necessarily, but it's people I know, it's the white liberals, it's the incredibly liberal white liberals that have the biggest problem with the St George's flag out of the people that sort of I spend time with. A lot of my friends that I went to university with.
I posted one yesterday for St George's Day.
Yeah, but I do think it's quite interesting that we've seen in the last few days Keir Starmer sort of, very much parking his tanks on sort of Conservatives' lawn on the St George's flag, on patriotism, and trying to make the case for a sort of patriotic Labour Party when it's been something that, Emily Thornberry got herself into trouble about this before. Yes. It's been a sticky issue for Labour before, and I know that a lot of the Labour base is very uncomfortable with it. So we've definitely conducted focus groups where people have been saying they don't like what Labour people who voted Labour in 2019 do not like that Labour's now embracing the St George's flag, the Union Jack flag, that this being a big part of their offer for the next election. I think it's I don't think those people are representative of British or English national identity.
Andrew, why is it that it's perfectly acceptable in Scotland to celebrate St Andrew's Day, in Ireland St Patrick's Day, in Wales St David's Day, and yet the English somehow feel almost guilty about celebrating St George's Day?
Well, they shouldn't. They should be equally as proud of their country and its heritage and the great things that England has done as a nation, as a part of our United Kingdom, as the Scots, the Irish, and the Welsh do about their culture, their history, and their tradition. So, in reference to the original question, the protest took place right outside my office on Whitehall yesterday, and they were a gang of hooligans, thugs, drunken louts, and they do not represent the vast majority of decent, upstanding English men and women. And it is a shame that they are seeking to commandeer that flag for their own divisive purposes. But actually, I think what we've seen recently has actually been a reclaiming of the flag of St George by decent English people. When, for example, if you look back at the footage of the 1966 World Cup final, the stands in Wembley, they're all waving the Union flag to support England. These days, you'll see them waving the St George's Cross. So there has been a reclaiming to a certain extent of the St George's Cross. The original question, I don't really understand the link. There are, as John says, there are arguments for. I would very vehemently give arguments against Scotland leaving the Union. These people do not represent England. They were, as I said, drunken, racist louts causing a disturbance on the streets of London yesterday. And frankly, they shouldn't be doing that.
Dom.
Well, London, I mean, I live in Cheltenham. I was coming out, I don't want to sound like middle-aged bloke coming up to London, because I still think I'm a Londoner to an extent, but I mean, it was kind of crazy. There was sort of two horses of the apocalypse running through London streets today, and then yesterday...
That was unrelated, wasn't it?
No, I know it was unrelated,
Yeah.
but it was the scenes of what was going on, and then it looked like live scenes from the Crusades yesterday. I mean, it was sort of the sort of rubbish Crusades. I personally loathe flags. I just think... You know, I'm sure it's way older than Bob Dylan, but patriotism is the last refuge to which a scoundrel crawls. It just doesn't do it for me at all.
What's wrong with being patriotic?
There's nothing wrong with it. It's not for me. I just think I don't find it that massively important. Possibly I grew up in Beirut to an English family, but where patriotism and nationalism, if you like, ripped countries apart to so many times that it's not something I'm massively fond of or think's massively important.
But it's possible to be patriotic without hating anybody else.
Yes, but I think that's what patriotism or modern patriotism and nationalism has become. So, it's aggressive, passionate patriotism.
Well, it shouldn't be, and it's revolting when it is. But, you go around Scandinavia. I go to Scandinavia quite a lot, and, they're very proud of their flag.
My wife is
acceptable
Canadian.
to be a Scottish nationalist, but not an English nationalist?
I think it's absolutely fine to be an English nationalist if you want to be an English nationalist.
But society tells us that it isn't.
Well, then don't listen to society. Be independently minded.
Make up your own unionist.
Make up your. Well, I don't think so. And most people after Brexit, realise why that sort of very narrow jingoism is deeply damaging and has ruined our economy and probably destroyed the union long term as well.
Well, let's not go down that road, because we have a different question to answer from Vaz, who says, should the UK follow America and move towards banning TikTok? And with Australia taking on Elon Musk's Twitter, is it? Where do you think the balance lies on free speech, Scarlett?
I think it's an increasingly contested question. The thing I'm most interested in on this one is how different the different age groups fall out on this, because we've done quite a lot of research into this, not just in England but across the world, in places like Australia as well. And younger generations, potentially not surprisingly, have a very different view of TikTok. They use it a lot more. They're very aware that it's Chinese owned, or that it's owned by a Chinese company rather, and a lot of them are quite sanguine about what this could mean for the sort of data and for the usage that potentially China might then have access to, and a lot of them still feel very positively towards it anyway. So I think it's a very interesting conversation that's going to happen, and something that, again, people have the younger generations, and I'm actually not that young anymore, but I feel I'm definitely not on TikTok.
I'm on TikTok.
But there's a big. I'm
a boomer on TikTok.
Well, but there's an increasingly big split on it, and I think it's going to be quite an interesting one for politicians to have to tackle. And I think it's something that everyone's actually quite on the back foot on at the moment. Haven't really quite got their head around how to regulate it, in what way, and again how to bring people with them on that.
So I'm a hypocrite. I am on TikTok. But somebody else does it for me, and I don't even have it on my phone.
I won't have it on my phone.
I think I'm in a weird situation because I use all of them. Essentially, there's a couple that my kids just say, no, you can't. I just don't. But I kind of have different gripes for different platforms, really. I mean, TikTok to me is it's not that toxic a place. But obviously you are supposedly having your info and all your information drained by the Chinese state, but I kind of assume they've got it already, and I've not got that massively important information. Twitter, or X, is possibly because I've got to that age, but I don't think so. And this is the Australian issue with it. I mean, it's just toxic now. I mean, it's utterly toxic. And every week I tell myself, this is it. I'm coming off it. But, it's where I started. So it's very odd. It's very confusing.
Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah. Well, just to sort of agree with Dom, I'm using X as it is now, less and less.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's a horrible platform to engage on. I use it to broadcast what I'm doing, and that is it. I don't engage on it at all. I don't have TikTok.
It's the future.
Well, I mean,
the Chinese need to know your details now.
There are obviously significant, serious questions that are being asked by countries around the world about Chinese involvement on these social media platforms, and of course we've seen the moves in America. Actually, bizarrely, some you might think connected to the aid package to Ukraine was a move to ensure that TikTok in the United States is actually owned by predominantly American shareholders. So there's a very interesting move around the world to look at this. I'm not the world's biggest social media addict. I use it for work. They use it to see what's going on. But you're absolutely right about the generational difference here. It is, but yeah, X as a platform, I'm afraid.
John Nicholson, this is in your policy bailiwick. What's your view? Do you think there is a case for banning TikTok?
Well, I'm uncomfortable on the whole about banning things, but we've had the high hegians of the various companies before us on the select committee, and so I had to look at TikTok quite closely for a while, and there's some shocking disinformation out there. There was one particular spreader of COVID vaccine disinformation, very attractive young woman, broadcasting just absolute nonsense, clearly targeted at young men, millions of views. And I asked the boss of TikTok why they hadn't removed it, and he claimed not to know anything about it. And they turn up and they lie. Their model is clearly to spread disinformation and get maximum numbers of views. And we've got to do something about that. We've got to do something about toxic disinformation.
Yeah.
And Twitter, I'm on Twitter. I use Twitter quite a lot. I don't engage in debates with Twitter because I realise that's completely pointless. I use it to broadcast my views, tell people what I'm doing. But what I've noticed as a gay man recently on Twitter is the upsurge of vile homophobic stuff. I get sent the most grotesque stuff on Twitter. I then report it. I copy and paste what Twitter's rules are about homophobic abuse to the Twitter moderators.
Doesn't go anywhere.
And then they'll write back saying that the person who just called me a greasy bender, for example, as one did, has not broken the rules against homophobic abuse. I mean, it's a joke. And what Germany showed was that if you hit these companies with huge punitive fines, then they start to hire moderators and they control the content. But if it's bad in English-speaking countries, can you imagine how much worse it is in some of the third world countries where they have no moderation of any kind? Twitter has no moderation in the vast majority of the world's languages.
That's terrifying.
What happens there is uncontrolled.
You touched on a point there where you talked about the homophobic bullying. I think that's something that troubled me was the announcement that Meta, that's the owner of Facebook and WhatsApp, was going to reduce the age at which you could get access to WhatsApp down to, I think, 13. And I think something we haven't spoken about is online bullying, which is, a scourge across society and a growing problem in many schools. And you're seeing school after school bringing in bans on mobile phones. You're seeing people openly discussing banning children accessing social media at all until the age of 16. I think we need to look very carefully at some of these proposals. I'm not suggesting that we do enact them, but there is a genuine problem out there about bullying, and John raised one of the issues, homophobic bullying on X right now. So there are a whole vast swathes of issues that have arisen as a result.
Don't get me on the chemtrailers.
On the what?
The chemtrailers are that's the new thing.
New one on me.
You don't know about chemtrails?
I don't know about chemtrails. You can educate me in the next couple of minutes. It's 8:48.
This is LBC.
Response only.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Andrew Bowie, Dom Joly, John Nicholson and Scarlett Maguire with us taking your calls and questions. This is from James. With more and more people dying in the Channel and more boats coming over, will your panel give the Rwanda plan a chance? Dom Joly?
No. I mean, it's ludicrous. I mean, what is more a deterrent than dying in the Channel? I mean, it's never going to happen anyway. They're never going to get anywhere. The flats that apparently they've bought in Rwanda have been sold. I mean, it's just a nonsense. It really is. So no, I won't.
Scarlett.
I can't believe it's been going on. I can't believe we've been talking about it for 2 years. It's been going on for so long. I think I certainly know that the public that we speak to don't have much faith that will make any difference. Wait to see whether the planes will take off. Wait to see whether that will have any impact, if we're allowed to actually see that before there's potentially even an election. But I think at the moment it seems to be that there's a lot of scepticism and not surprising when, as I said, it's been around for so long, not doing very much.
Do you think if a couple of planes did take off, do you think that would make any difference to people's voting intentions?
I'm torn on this because on the one hand I do think that at least everyone we speak to for our work seems to have completely stopped listening to anything the government's announcing, saying or doing. Sorry again. And it kind of doesn't really matter, and I think that's why we've seen with the budget, with the autumn statement, all these cuts to national insurance and all these other policies, and nothing's moving the dial and everything's remained incredibly static. The one thing I would say though is that when you look at Conservative voters who've moved to Reform, when you look at Conservative voters who currently don't know, who are the two pools of voters that are most likely to come back to the Conservatives at the moment and give them a better chance at the next election, their overriding priority is immigration. So if they were to perceive that something was being done on immigration, that would surely help Rishi Sunak a bit. It just depends whether they actually believe this is going to deliver.
John?
Well, one of the peculiar things to watch the other day was all these Tory MPs shaking their heads and saying this is absolute lunacy, this policy. I think James cleverly called it batshit crazy, before all tripping through the lobbies and voting for the very policy that they'd said was lunacy. There is a kind of collective madness has come over the Conservative Party on this. Poor old Rishi Sunak, who's heading to a landslide defeat, is trying to force through this policy that is costing £1.8 million per person that they manage to deport. If they manage to deport anybody, nobody gets on to a boat because they've got better options on land. It's impossible for some people to get safe routes to the United Kingdom. If you are, for example, an Afghan, you just can't get here. And Victoria Derbyshire did a very good interview with a young man who was had tried to escape and had to use a boat to get here. And in common with most people who use boats to get here, they're then given sanctuary. They get asylum, and they get asylum because they have good claims. And what we should be doing is making it easier for people to use a safe route to come and claim sanctuary on our shores. This is a truly appalling, racist policy.
No, John, it's not racist.
And it is, and I honestly think, Andrew, I don't believe for a moment that you support this policy privately. And I think once the election is done and gone, I think the Conservative Party, the sensible people in the Conservative Party, will drop it like a hot potato. It's an embarrassment to see sensible Tories voting for this.
Andrew?
John, I'd really take issue with you describing the policy as a racist policy, but put that to one side. This is a part of the overall package that we are enacting to try and prevent the tragedy that we saw happen yesterday in the Channel ever occurring again. We need to stop the vicious trade, the pernicious trade in human life that is happening right now. People making money off of the trade in human beings, getting them onto those flimsy boats and sailing them across the Channel, knowing full well that those boats might sink and that people might die on the way. Of course, we need to invest in developing ways that people can apply to come to the United Kingdom, but we can only do that when we free the system up from having to deal with the surge in illegal crossings across the Channel. So the Rwanda policy as a deterrent, as part of an overall package that we are implementing to stop this trade in human life, is incredibly important.
And the morning after you pass this, a group of people, morning after you pass this powerful deterrent, the very next day, a group of people got onto a boat and lost their lives. If it was ever to be a deterrent. Immediately after the legislation had been passed, with all the publicity that was getting, that would have been the moment when it deterred. It doesn't deter.
But what would you do instead? This is the question I always ask my Labour counterparts, Liberal Democrats, Scottish National Party. What if not Rwanda, then what? How do you stop this?
Well, there's an obvious answer to that, which is, David Cameron this morning, of course, said that Brexit had been the cause
No, he didn't
of
say that,
this.
John.
Yes,
You're putting words in his mouth. He did not say Brexit was the cause.
He said it would not have happened had it not been for Brexit.
No, he said that if we had a returns agreement with France, as we had before we left the European Union, that would be helpful. We want to have. We have done a deal with France.
You're dancing on the head of a pen. Had Brexit not happened, well, I can't cross-examine him myself, of course, because he's in the House of Lords. But had Brexit not happened, this would not be happening. It is the business model for these people, smugglers, that has been caused because of Brexit. And the answer to your question, very directly, is I'd give safe routes.
In the Mediterranean.
To be fair, before Brexit, there were people coming across the channel on the back of lorries.
But not on the boats.
No, not on
these numbers.
Because that was dealt with in cooperation with the French government.
Yes.
And so then they looked for a different way of doing it.
There are people smugglers right now on the Mediterranean. The European Union is taking a much firmer line on illegal immigration right now. In fact, looking to us to see if Rwanda is a success, which I very much hope it is, so that we can.
One of the ironies is that the United Kingdom government tells LGBT travellers that it's not safe to go to Rwanda. It's not a safe destination for them, and yet the United Kingdom government
I've been to Rwanda.
I know you have. You told me that last time, but you were going under slightly different circumstances, and I'm sure you were terribly modest and discreet when you were there. But they are sending LGBT people to Rwanda, despite being told that it's not safe for LGBT people. It's a farce.
One final question for Andrew. It is well known that Rishi Sunak was not a fan of this policy before he became Prime Minister. It's, as John quoted James cleverly, he wasn't a fan of it either, yet he's Home Secretary, and yet those two have pushed this through, despite at least being lukewarm, if not wholly against it. Why?
Look, we support the Rwandan policy. We support the act that has now gone through the Houses of Parliament and will have been, I think, by tomorrow, been given royal assent. And of course, we need to give it a chance. I'm very supportive of it as a policy. I hope it works, because what we cannot have happening again on the channel is seeing the deaths of innocent men, women and children as a result of the people's...
That doesn't answer Ian's question, of course.
And there isn't time now, because we've got to go to our final question, which is from Kurt. Game of Thrones star Liam Cunningham says he became an actor as a distraction from his job as an electrician. What extra job would you like to do just as a distraction? Scarlett?
I'd be a pianist.
Would you?
Yeah, I was an organist for a year, but I was not very good at that. But I would be a pianist.
Are you a good piano player?
I used to be, but I play every day.
Your eyes have lit up talking about it.
Yeah, I love it. It's my absolute favourite thing.
What's your favourite thing to play on the piano?
At the moment, I'm relearning Beethoven Pathétique, which is gorgeous. Yeah, it's amazing. So, but my favourite thing is Rachmaninoff.
I'm not going to pretend I know what that is, but you two clearly do, because you're cultured.
It's lovely.
Well, I play it.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Anyway, so that's
there you go. Duet.
Yeah.
Dom?
A sniper.
Okay, well, that took a turn.
Yeah.
Wow.
That would be a distraction, wouldn't it?
It'd be a total distraction. It's something I do very well on video games. I'm not sure I'd be very good. What?
Paintballing.
No. Well, I don't know how far I'd take it, but it's a position that I've played very well on video games. Possibly we'd go to paintballing if we went the full hog. You know, say. I mean, we need to build up our defences. Maybe I'm there for them.
Well, Andrew, what would you like to do as a distraction?
I was in the National Youth Orchestra of Scotland playing the violin once, but I don't know if I'd like to do that as a job, as a distraction. I think I'd quite like to be a tour guide, because one of the things I enjoy most about being an MP is when constituents come in and you show them around and take them around the history. So I think if I, had some spare time, then that's what I might have.
I've let the side down here.
John?
Well, one of the things about being an MP is you don't have a lot of spare time. I miss broadcasting very much. I love to interview. One of the things when you become a politician that's quite difficult and challenging, I suppose, is that you don't get to be as objective as you'd like to be a lot of the time, because you're arguing policy, and sometimes I'm uncertain about things and quite want to ask questions about it rather than always having to, or being encouraged to pontificate about
which SNP policy are you most unsure of?
I agree with all of them blindly. I think they're all excellent policies.
Particularly policy on camper vans.
The other thing, well, it's funny you should say that. Somebody asked me recently on social media whether or not I'd ever been in a camper van with the former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, and I said she'd taken me for a tour of St Andrews Square in a camper van and allowed me to play with the Bunsen burners, which I described as the great honour of my life, actually. Sadly, I was hoping this story might be picked up as a bit of disinformation by the Daily Mail.
It will now.
And it didn't.
Social media.
Because our digital team are already editing it to put out.
Playing the piano, though, I agree. I play the piano, play the harpsichord. And
harpsichord's quite tricky.
Harpsichord is quite tricky, and I really enjoy that. And I've heard Andrew play, and Andrew is a brilliant violinist and also plays fiddle music brilliantly as well.
Insert your own joke there.
Yes.
Dom is reminding me that we've gone past 9 o'clock.
Sorry, I've got a train.
You've got a train. Right,
I've got a train
we are finishing right now.
Yeah,
thank you very much indeed for joining us. We'll be back with Cross Question on Monday. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to talk about no-fault evictions, because the government seems to be backtracking on its promise to ban no-fault evictions. I want to ask why they would do that. What's been your experience of being chucked out by your landlord for apparently no good reason?